Okay, good evening, welcome. My name is Kusalasara and I'm really happy to see you all here. It's nice to have a nice full shrine room. And of course, really happy that those of you who are watching from home are here joining us as well. Happy New Year to everyone. Delighted to be kicking off a new seminar series. I can't remember how long it is, but for over the next so many weeks, we're as Pranimanas mentioned, we're exploring this book called Mind in Harmony, which lays out, well, today's talk is called something like Mapping the Mind. So it lays out for us a map that we can make use of in our Buddhist practice. So why we need that and how it's going to help us, well, hopefully we'll start to get a hint of it today and be more deeply revealed over the coming weeks as we explore it in depth. So we're talking about the mind, which is an elusive thing. If we all wrote down a definition of the mind, I think we'd all come up with something really different. So I'm going to start with some images, which is the Buddhist vision of the mind, and see where that takes us. So one image of the Buddhist vision of the mind is, the Buddha had a vision of humanity as being a pond of lotuses with everybody at different stages of growth. Some people being still emerging from the mud, and some people opening up to the light of the sun with the flowers, the petals high above the water, opening up. And that's one vision of the mind, is one of growth. These beautiful textile hangings are in fact a reference to that vision. And in that pond there are blue lotuses, red lotuses, white lotuses, all kinds of lotuses, each one with the same potential and the same trajectory of growth. There's a vision of lotuses opening and growth as a Buddhist vision of the mind. Sometimes we talk about the mind in different ways. So when we learning the Metta Bhavana, at some point we encounter the Karaniya Metta Sutta, which is where the Buddha teaches the Metta Bhavana, where he talks about metta, this quality of loving kindness. And in that, he's describing that one can love all beings in the same way that a mother loves her child, her only child. So any being that one encounters through the lens of this tender, nurturing, on-side growth. So that's another metaphor or another image for what the mind can do, what the mind is capable of, that the Buddha is describing. And sometimes the mind is given other names like luminous, radiant, in its potential. And we may have tastes of that actually in meditation or in different experiences. We may have a sort of flavour of a different kind of mind. On the retreat that I've just been on, I'm aware that we're talking about retreats a lot, and I know that not everybody did manage to go on retreat, or even some of you might not have even tried to go on retreat over Christmas. So just bear with us if you're not among the number. But we were on our retreats, the same one that Akasha Mitra was on, we were discussing Pure Lands, and that's another Buddhist vision of the mind, is the kind of mind that sees everything as beautiful, everything as teaching us deeper and deeper truths, that beauty and truth are to be found in the very texture, the very fabric of that land. And that gets described visually and with words in glorious ways of jewel-laden trees, of perfumed houses, perfumed trees and flowers, etc. So we have these extravagant visions of what the mind can be like. And these aren't fantasies. They sound fantastic to us. They're not fantasies. What they are is an attempt to convey a religious experience. And whether that's a fleeting experience or a complete turning about of someone's consciousness, that's where these images come from. And they're appealing, aren't they? So we hear about this and we think, yes, that sounds about right. That sounds how I'd like my mind to be. And we are attracted to it and start to try and find out more about how that mind can be developed, or what's needed to have a mind that loves any living being that it encounters, or to have a mind that is only there for growth. So beautiful, fantastic start to our Buddhist life is this vision of inspiration. And sometimes it doesn't go so smoothly. So sometimes we need a bit more detail. And I'm saying the word sometimes ironically, because that's a big understatement. So the vision is inspiring and motivating, and it gives us a flavour of what we're looking for, but it doesn't tell us how to get there. And actually, just while we're talking about the vision, I read this poem on the recent retreat that we were on. I've only just discovered it. I'll read it again. It's called Aspiration. So, the dim sun sinks to rest in a west of watery gold. The young stars climb the sky, and there like flowers unfold. In the forest vast of night, petals of purest light. So may my heart unfold, when the suns of the world have set, in the forest vast of the void, wisdom with mercy met, in that tranquil silent hour, like the flower and the scent of a flower. So that poem's by Sangharakshita, our teacher and founder of this movement. And in that poem, it's called Aspiration, so he's poetically expressing his wishes for his own spiritual life. And it's a bit like a prayer, isn't it? Like that may that happen to me. So maybe that's something of what goes on for us. Like we see something beautiful, whether it's the Buddhist vision of the mind, or something else that's beautiful. And beauty can really point to a sense of something more, and whether we're conscious of it or not, there often arises some kind of aspiration to move towards that beauty, or to be taking part in it somehow. So that poem feels like a prayer in a way, like, oh, may that happen for me. But it doesn't help us to, once again we resonate, but it doesn't help us to move on. So this is where we need some help. So what the Buddhist vision of the mind is described in these images, but how do we find those places? How do we get our minds to be there? And that can be answered in many, many different ways. The whole Buddhist path really is to help us with that. But even the word path, it gives us a clue to what we're going to be exploring. So we're talking about routes, paths, maps, ways that can help us, ways that will guide, means that enable us to be guided towards this, to this vision, this beautiful vision. So, where do we go from here? Well, maybe I'll just say a little bit about the book. So, the first chapter that I'm talking about at the moment is called Mapping the Mind. And Subhuti, so the writer Subhuti, is drawing on, this isn't so important, but I'll just give you this information anyway. He's drawing on the Yogacara Abhidharma, which is a system, or one of many systems, which describes and elucidates aspects of the mind, which gives us a kind of a map of all of the kinds of mental events that we can experience. So in this system, the mind is not described in an image or a vision, but it's described as moment-to-moment mental events. So mental events being all of the different kind of inputs and responses that we can have in any given, which we will have in any given experience. So some of those are constant, some of those are fairly invisible, they're underlying our experience to such a degree that we don't notice them, and many of them come and go and are manifestations of deep patterns of the mind. Yeah. So what this book gives us is a map, and a map can really support mindfulness. So I'm really starting to see this book as a way of deepening my own mindfulness, my own awareness of my mental states, which is what the practice of mindfulness very much does. So, and it reminds me of one of my favourite definitions of mindfulness, actually, which comes from Sangharakshita, which says that mindfulness can be described as integrating one's whole experience and continually re-establishing a sense of harmony and direction. He goes on to say it's a balancing and integrating quality that permeates every area of experience. Now, because the book's called Mind in Harmony, that brought that quote to mind, and I think there's something very particular about the vision of a harmonious mind, something that points to the fact that our minds might not always be in harmony, and that there's something that we can work towards using mindfulness. Now, the reason that we might need a map is because even if we have the idea, okay, so we've got a Buddhist vision of the mind, and that requires me to examine my mental state. So that might be one thing that mindfulness asks us to do, is to examine our mental states. The way that we examine our mental states will dictate what we find there. So if we just sit in meditation and we just watch our minds, and we've never had any guidance for anything that we watch for, what we'll see will be fairly dependent on the kinds of things we're used to seeing in our experience already. So each moment to moment, the mind reveals mostly habits. So this is what Pranimanas was getting at when we did that first settling down in meditation, just in the first half, wasn't it? That this what the mind's been doing, the mind will keep doing generally, but also how the mind is used to seeing, the mind will keep seeing in that way. So what someone with more experience can do is to show us different ways of looking, which is what Buddhism does, and particularly mindfulness does. So can show us different ways of looking, and if we look in different ways, then we start to see new things. Yeah. So this is partly why we need a map to show us what landmarks to look for in our exploration of the mind. Yeah. So where do we go from here? One of the things that Subhuti particularly talks about is that what I want to say? So yeah, that he particularly talks about is effort. So he's got some different titles in this chapter, and he's talking about, one of the titles is the Bliss of Effort. Okay, so how do we? So backtrack a little bit. So maybe we've come to the Buddhist Centre. Either we're in the habit of coming on Monday nights, or it's New Year, we want to try something new, or we haven't been for ages and it's New Year and we want to just take this opportunity to re-establish something or look for something new, or we've been on retreat and we've been in touch with inspiration, and we want to establish that as well. So there's a sense that we've, whether you're new to coming to the Buddhist Centre or you've been coming along for a little while, there'll be a reason that you want to come that will probably, on the surface, might look a bit different for different ones of you, but underneath there'll probably be the sense of an intention and a wish to work on your mind in some way. And that intention, the reason is because we're looking for the right conditions to do this work. Now, part of working on our minds is making an effort. So this is where the bliss of effort comes in. Now, what Subhuti is talking about is how making effort can be, we can have quite a difficult relationship with it, and some of us might not. So actually what I would like to do is just ask you guys, if I talk about making effort in your practice, in your Buddhist life, or the word effort in general, what would your response be? What's your relationship with effort? So this is not a trying to find the right answer. It's just,
For me, it's sort of the balance between, if falling asleep is one end of the spectrum, and being, wired and very tense at the other end is somewhere sort of in the middle, like a happy kind of alertness and awareness, but not sort of teetering on either side too much.
And are you talking about in meditation there in particular, or
yes,
just in...
But also, in conversation and things, it's very much transferable. I find as I'm walking through day-to-day life, I can quite often be one of the two energies, like either too kind of too flitting and kind of a little bit unfocused, or I might be the other side, kind of lethargic and more reserved. So again, I think it's finding the middle ground.
So the effort is, where's the effort in that in between those two? Where are you applying yourself?
Well, it's concentration, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's being in the moment, understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, convey. And I think the lethargy sort of comes almost in the idea that you're almost not, it's hard to explain that, but not able to engage as much. So I suppose, it depends on your intention largely.
Yeah, okay, so there's a desire to be not too restless and, like you said, flitty, and there's a desire also to not be vague and lethargic, and noticing what effort is required to come to something in between. Yeah, okay, good. What about,
I was just going to say, sometimes I find it quite frustrating because sometimes I feel like I have effort in abundance, and then sometimes I feel like it's not there at all. So I know that I each day I meditate, so I've definitely got enough effort to sustain me via that. But for instance, coming along to the Buddhist Centre, I know it always makes me feel good and sort of connected, and I always come away feeling a bit inspired, but can't always galvanise the effort, and that's quite frustrating.
Yeah, okay.
Or not.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, so not always being able to sort of follow through with what you know is good for you. Yeah. Nadia.
I would consider it as putting in conscious application of the teachings in parts of my life. So, for example, if I was talking about meditation here, effort for me would look like applying any teachings given to me consciously.
Okay, yeah.
In my meditation, and trying to keep a thread consistently throughout that meditation. So applying that teaching consistently throughout that meditation practice.
Yeah, okay, that's really nice. The consciously and keep following a thread. Yeah, okay, good. Any other thoughts just about effort generally as well? Yeah.
For me, it would be very similar to what that lady said about consistency. I think Akasha Mitra mentioned it outside about having that consistency to meditate every day, but also to try and be mindful in my day-to-day life and be mindful of how I'm feeling, how I'm reacting to certain stimulus as well. So I think for me it's that consistency of keeping that, not only the practice going, but having that awareness from day to day as well. Yeah, good. Yeah, consistency and day to day. And any more? There's lots of people got. Yeah, you and then.
To me, like effort has a negative connotation. Yeah, I just feel like like effort, I have to do something above what I already know how to do. If that makes any sense.
Okay.
Yeah, like I know how to do things, and if someone, well, I suppose in school when they used to say, if you just put more effort in, I never understood that. It's like, well, I'm trying my best here.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's.
No, that's really good. Like effort is sometimes feels like something being demanded of you that you don't really know what to do if you're already doing your best. Yeah. So that's really helpful. Also, if there are any responses online, that's good. I'll just go to John.
I think effort can quite often be tiring.
Tiring.
I wouldn't necessarily associate it with being blissful.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So this is getting to be a real mixture, isn't it? Alex.
I guess I associate it with like pushing myself a bit. So, which could be positive or negative, but like rather than just kind of, maybe if it's something that I find easy or something that's just kind of ticking along, whereas like effort suggests that like actually I'm going to push myself to go that bit further or make more of an effort, try a bit harder.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So and what's it like being pushed by yourself?
Sometimes I think it's where the most satisfying experiences come from.
Okay.
So say you're thinking about like exercise, and then you think like, oh, okay, actually, I'm going to push myself to run that extra kilometre, and you feel really pleased with yourself afterwards because you're satisfied that you made the effort.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it can definitely be a positive.
Yeah. And next. Yeah.
I think going back to this whole, in your day to day, effort for me, especially with the day to day, it's like a really small thing, but it's really difficult. It's just the start of the day, especially with being mindful throughout the day. Like I find that like my thoughts in the first 30 minutes of the day, and whether I allow myself to go down a particular line of thinking makes all the difference for the rest of the day.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And what that implies is that you really see the importance of making a particular effort at a particular time, that and you see the effect of making that effort or not
like
making it.
Break. Like if I give up early in the day, then the day's almost done for. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any online comments? No. Okay. So that's really fascinating, actually. Like selection of associations with effort, and I think, and I liked how some of you were talking about like applying things very, like Nadia said, consciously to what you were to a situation and following a thread. That was mentioned in a few people, and day to day, which sort of indicates a sense of knowing where you need to practice and what you want to work on, which is part of really what we're talking about. So in the introduction to this book, in Mind in Harmony, Subhuti, well, he was saying that he was noticing some different things that people were struggling with in their spiritual life. So I'll just say a couple of those things, and then maybe we'll go a little bit more back towards specifically working and what effort looks like. So one of the things that he noticed was that sometimes people practicing in practicing the spiritual life in our Sangha in the UK and India weren't actually able to resolve difficulties between them very, very easily. So for different reasons, conflicts were arising, and it seemed very, very difficult for those conflicts to be resolved. Now, in case you think, oh crikey, I thought Buddhists were meant to be really like not have conflict. I'm just going to point out there's historical precedents of Buddhist bickering throughout the centuries, even at the time of the Buddha. So at the time of the Buddha, there was a really divisive quarrel at a place called Kosambi, and it was about a disciplinary thing. Using the latrine, they used water, and one of the monks left a bit of water in the bucket, clean water, but that was against the Vinaya, the rules at the time, and someone else noticed. And they kind of resolved it between them, but then one of them spread, the one who noticed, he spread it out around that the guy who left the water in the bucket was actually breaking the rules, and he was a well-known teacher. Anyway, without going into much more detail, this quarrel about a little bit of water left in a pail became very divisive. People... the Buddha tried to sort it out like quite a few times without much success, and the townspeople, so you can imagine that the Sangha, these were the monks living outside of a town and then going into the town, gathering alms, etc., and lay followers in the town would come out and to where they were living and get teachings and talk about the Dharma, etc. But this quarrel, people taking sides, loyalties, etc., all came out. So this big division, and then the townspeople were like, well, what is going on with these monks? So their reputation began to get marred, etc. So the Buddha was like trying to sort it out, and eventually he got fed up and was like, these bickering bhikkhus, meaning monks, and just went into the forest, and he said this lovely poem about he saw a lonely elephant, a lone elephant. I don't know if he was lonely or not. The emotions weren't described, but a lone elephant, and the Buddha wrote this little poem about resonating with this big tusked elephant. So he's just relishing being solitary and not around the bickering monks. Anyway, so this is something that happens, and I think it sometimes particularly happens when you have a vision of what the mind can be like. So sometimes ideals can cause these things to come out a little bit more strongly than they otherwise would. So Subhuti noticed that people didn't quite seem able to take responsibility for their part in what was going on in the disputes. So he said what seemed to happen was that, and you might recognise this, I certainly do, in a difficulty one is more concerned with what the other person has said, done, what their motives might be, etc. in this difficulty, rather than looking at what part oneself has to play in it. So rather than looking at the fact that you might be inhabiting unwholesome mental states, one's always concerned with the motives. I think that's particularly interesting, isn't it? Like, what if someone does something that you don't like? We start to attribute more than just the action, but we like, why would they do that to me, etc. So that was happening. And Subhuti, he also noticed that he was teaching a lot in India and a lot in the UK, that there was a tendency in both countries to have a little disputes, but in India there was the society being structured a bit more differently. there was more of a sense that somebody might have not conformed to social norms, so done something sort of against convention, and then that one gets indignant about that as like a righteous indignation. So, you know, that person is so rude, for example, or that person is a little bit like the water pail thing. That person has transgressed this social code or whatever. And in the UK, and this does become relevant in a minute, that we're much more attuned to recognising and dealing with our own emotional landscape. You know, that Europe is where psychotherapy was born, and psychiatry. So this kind of inner work, being in touch with our feelings, saying that we're hurt or angry. So Subhuti is saying we're much more able to do that, sort of say, why we're hurt or angry, but not actually able to take into account the impact of that hurt or anger on other people. So do you see what I mean? That there's an in-touchness with one's own world of difficulty, or an awareness of how someone else has caused difficulty, but that they're both causing difficult mental states. And what that implies is that we need to work out exactly what's happening, so that we can work out the problem, and that it looks a little bit different for every circumstance. So it might be that we don't need to say, well, that's, you know, as Westerners we're only going to be dealing with the example that I just gave. It can be helpful for us to think about both kinds of situations and see what kind of attitudes we tend to bring to difficulties. Yeah. So so what we're talking about is the effect that difficult mental states have, or as the Buddha put it, unwholesome or unskillful, sometimes translated as evil, but maybe we'll steer clear of evil just at the moment. What effect that has on not only our own minds, but our relationships with other people, which becomes much more of an area of ethics, although mind states as well as also an ethical arena. But our relationships with other people, our actions in body, speech and mind. So that's what we're talking about. How difficult mental states, unwholesome mental states, lead to difficult, harsh speech, lead to blame, lead to righteous indignation, etc. We'll go into much more detail over the coming weeks about the kinds of things that can happen in relation to that. So there's a need to think of ways to promote harmony. There's a need to identify exactly what goes on for us in particular. There's a need to also, the thing that Subhuti noticed was that some people it's like we start out on the spiritual life and we're given the basic Buddhist teachings, and we're given the precepts, we learn the mindfulness of breathing, we learn the metta bhavana, and we try them out, and we have varying degrees of success, and we get a taste for them. But those teachings are very, very general, and what we're applying them to is our own mind. So my mind has got some similar characteristics to all of your minds, but it's also got filled with my conditioning. My whole life has sort of created the mind that is active at this moment now. And that's different from the conditioning of each of your minds. So at some point we need to start being more astute about how we apply Buddhist teachings to our particular circumstance. Like, what is it that is tripping us up? What is it that's becoming an obstacle? How are we finding it difficult? And also, where is it working? What are the positives as well? What are the bits that we find inspiration in, etc. So this need to find a way to work with our own particular circumstance, and that becomes more and more pressing. The more sort of interested and the deeper we want to go into Buddhist practice. And do you see how those two things relate? So that if we're not working out how the metta bhavana applies in our particular circumstance, then the tendency we may have around certain kinds of people or particular relationships might not get addressed if we're applying things into too general a way, and then we don't quite know what's going on for us and why we keep getting into these repeated same kinds of difficulties, etc. It's like, why does this always happen to me, that I get into these kinds of arguments without realising that, oh, it's me, that I'm the common denominator. Do you see what I mean? So Subhuti is identifying that we need to find out of these universal practices, we need to identify how it needs to apply in our own lives at this very moment. And I thank Pranyamanis for this. He pointed out this very important sentence in the book, which is that, she's gone, which sums this up, which is what we're talking about is how to deepen into Buddhist practice. So how do we want to go deeper? Which is a sense, I think it's a sense that we all experience. It's like, how do we deepen into our minds? What does going deeper in practice mean? And Subhuti sums it up by saying, converting sincere but abstract idealism into hands-on ability to transform one's mental states. Yeah, so a sincere but abstract idealism into hands-on ability to transform one's mental states. So Buddhism only works when it becomes not just an idea, but it starts affecting our behaviour. Otherwise, it's not effective. It's just a lovely idea. It doesn't mean there's loads of lovely ideas, aren't there? So it only works when it informs our decisions. It informs our decisions about how we communicate and what goes on in our minds. So this is where there needs to be, this is coming back to the idea of effort. We need to know how to transform our minds and where to put the effort in. And if we've got this idea that we want to go deeper or we want to grow, it's not going to happen just by magic. Magic might get involved, but it's not going to happen just by magic. We need to apply ourselves. And one of the interesting things, and this has come out from talking to you about what the idea of effort is having a better relationship with effort. So that means like working out what's effective, where to put effort in, because I think probably I've definitely experienced like putting effort into the wrong things, and it just feels like it can, I just keep trying and I keep trying. It's making no difference, and it is making a difference. It's getting me frustrated. So there can be, I think, particularly in the West, we have like these two different ways of applying different relationships with effort. So one is like really willful, so I don't really identify with this anyway, really, really willful, very, very sort of strong push to achieve. So this idea of like effort to achieve. And if we don't get that right, then we, like someone said, it's tiring, or we feel like we're doing stuff out of motivated by something that's not really our own desire, or we just get exhausted because we're motivated by anxiety. So that's another thing. We're not resourced enough to sustain that effort. And then the reason that, and that's the reason why effort gets a bad press. So then we go to the other way of just like, I'm just going to let everything unfold. I'm just going to like relax and not make any effort. And that sounds really great, doesn't it? Like, let's just let everything be just as it is, which isn't that good for progress either. And that the danger there is a sort of stagnation or a sort of wallowing. And out of the two poles, I'm definitely in the wallowing, relaxing kind of, and then with these occasional like bursts of anxious, like, oh crikey, yeah, I've wallowed so much in my life, I've just let things, I'm going to make a really sort of anxious effort. So what we need is a guide to like, what can we expect of our minds? Where is it pliable? Where are we going to make a difference? So this is what this map is going to show us. It's going to show us what's constant in our experience. It's going to show us what's variable. It's going to show us what's positive. So even can be really helpful just to learn what's a positive mental state, and it might not always be what you think it is. So for instance, sadness is not necessarily a negative mental state. It's not unskillful. Positive mental state isn't just cheerful. It includes, it's a lot richer than that. So learning what's a positive mental state and learning what's an unwholesome mental state, and recognising that doesn't give us much reward, unwholesome mental states. Particularly, Subhuti talks about in this chapter, and I'll finish with this, is the four right efforts, which is a really, a well-known meditation sort of formula, but we use it in not just in meditation. So in the four right efforts, we are, in fact, the Buddha talks about awakening the desire for. So this is really, really important. Awakening the desire for preventing unwholesome mental states. So doing things that stop aversion, hatred, craving, etc., arising in particular ways. So preventing that. The second right effort is eradicating those that have already arisen. So you can imagine, sitting in meditation, reasonably concentrated, you can sort of see this thought coming about a fantasy that's going to take you right out off your cushion and onto the internet, where you're going to buy this whatever thing that you don't really need. Yeah. So ideally, you're like, aha, I will prevent that mental state from arising. I will come into contact with my breath or something, and deepen my current experience. And I'm simplifying this, but then if it's going well, you can that thought can not land properly in your whole being. It can just float by, and well done, you've eradicated an unwholesome mental state. And then you notice actually beneath that there's a bit of aversion. You're doing the metta bhavana, you're on the good friend stage, and actually you find that there's a bit of aversion to your good friend, and actually you didn't really realise, but you're sort of feeding it by complaining about them, and sort of then dragging up a few other things that they've done in the past. So if they've done something irritating recently, why not just kind of build up the picture? They haven't called you, they haven't messaged you to say Happy New Year, whatever. And actually, there was that time when they just didn't get in touch for ages, and and actually they are a bit like that, like. So okay, but then there's a bit of mindfulness, there's awareness, and you're like, okay, actually this is really negative. So it's quite hard to spot that is actually negative. You have to have some awareness. Okay, this is negative. I don't even like it. What am I doing? And if there's enough positivity in your experience, or enough sense of wanting to make that effort, desire to make that effort, you can okay, I'm just going to let that go. I'm going to let go of it. I don't need it. Yeah. So that's preventing and eradicating. And then much more positive is the cultivating and strengthening cultivating and strengthening positive mental states that arise naturally in your mind. So looking for, and in fact setting out to do the metta bhavana in the first place is directly a way of doing that, or any meditation. So you don't have any positive mental states going on in your mind, but it's like, okay, I really feel the need to do that. How am I going to do that? I'm going to draw on a memory of something that makes me feel grateful, etc. Something like that. So creating, cultivating, and then the other one is to make effort to maintain and stabilize in those positive mental states. And so that is really also part of that is recognizing that the mind will naturally create positive situations. So the mind can do really destructive things, and it can do really wonderful things. So noticing when your mind is positive, and I think that's particularly important in our culture, to start noticing the positive aspects of the mind. We don't always notice that our mind has got these really, really good qualities that seem to be natural, inherent in it. So that can be quite, like if I was going to give you one of those practices, I would say look for positive mental states, notice when they arise naturally, and then see if you can use that to stabilize them, maintain them, or perfecting them. That's how the Buddha described it. So making more of that. So those are the 4 right efforts, and what's key in that is awakening the desire for them. Yeah, so not making effort, or those 4 right efforts, or any effort out of the wrong kind of motivation, because that's going to not last very long and not bear much fruit. And Subhuti talks about this, that we need to start to love the results of our efforts. And he even talks about often we think about meditation as being something that we do in order to enjoy good mental states the rest of the day. So that's what you were implying in your morning mindfulness practice. And he's saying, well, what about cultivating these positive, or making the 4 right efforts, for example, during the day, and enjoying the fruits of them in meditation. And that can be one of the reasons that we sometimes come to a bit of a dead end in meditation. It's not because we're meditating wrong, but because we're not applying the teachings more broadly in our daily lives, and that may include struggling with ethical issues. So this is where the trajectory, this is where the wish for this book comes from, is for us to find more harmony in our mind by discovering the deeper patterns of the mind, knowing where we can make effort, where we can eradicate and recognise and eradicate unskillful mental states, and where we can discover more positivity, which creates this beautiful vision of the mind in harmony. And not only that, what we're talking about is a mind that cannot be pinned down at all. So we're not trying to, in a way, we're given a map, we're not trying to define the mind. We're not trying to say this is the mind, it's here, it does this. It's more like we're given ways to recognise the patterns of this thing that we call mind. We don't know where it starts, we don't know where it ends, and we don't know what it can do. And part of this effort of mindfulness is actually to recognise the mystery of it, and to stop trying to solidify, to grasp, to create a sense of self that has a mind that is me, that is pitted against the rest of the world in the different ways. So this mind that can abide in the ungraspable nature of mind is where all of this map can take us, and by then we need to, we just throw away the map and we just dwell in the mystery without worrying about it too much. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that's given you a taste of where Subhuti is going to take us over the next few weeks. Much more to be discovered. And yes, we'll finish there. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you come for the rest of the seminar series. And are you teaching next week, Pranyamanas? No. Okay. I can't remind you who's teaching next week because we don't know. But blank faces from the team. Yeah.
So is it same time Monday next week?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for coming. So if we'll we'll just finish there, and if you want to, as you leave, put your mats and cushions away, that would be of great help.
Thank you.
Thank you.